We've been doing some fairly basic calculations in the Trump 100 HQ, David, and we've worked out that Donald Trump has spoken this week for around 7 hours. That is absolutely staggering. The only person who I think's spoken more this week on live television is David Blevins.
But there is a difference. He's 79 years old, Martha.
I won't ask you how old you are, David. It's been polite. But both very impressive. Both very, very impressive levels of stamina, I will say.
He can talk nearly as long as me.
I'm Martha Kelner in Los Angeles.
And I'm David Blevins in the Trump100 podcast studio here in Washington, D.C. On today's episode, Trump and Putin have been on the phone, just as Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky touches down in D.C. The diplomatic game of chess continues for a conflict Trump said he would solve in 24 hours. He plans to meet Putin in the next 2 weeks. We'll get into what was discussed.
And I've been looking into the human impact of Donald Trump's immigration raids, talking to the family of one man who died in detention.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin chatted on the phone today. The call apparently lasted for more than 2 hours. 2.5 hours, say the Russians, Martha.
Yeah, whichever way you cut it, that is a long conversation. And I think a lot of that time taken up by the translation and so on. But, you know, talking to Vladimir Putin or talking to Donald Trump for 24 hours is quite something.
I'm glad I'm not paying the telephone bill. Yes, and it's been a while since they last spoke. It was back in August, just a couple of days after their Alaska summit.
Yeah, I was there in Anchorage, David, for that Trump-Putin summit back in the summer. Donald Trump at that point sounded very confident about him brokering a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. He was talking about it happening in the next few days or weeks. We know that he is intent on solving, and I put solving in inverted commas here, in solving as many wars as he can. That's something that he boasts of. It's been 2 months since he went to Alaska. There has been no progress on ending the war in Ukraine, definitely no meeting between Putin and Zelensky in the diary. We know that Donald Trump has grown frustrated with the lack of progress. He's been cranking up the pressure on Russia and Putin. The rhetoric has swung back in the favour of Zelensky. The US are now sharing more intelligence with Ukraine. There's talk of him supplying Ukraine with more long-range missiles. I wonder whether some of that pressure has affected Putin, because somewhat unannounced, really, we had news of this call between the two.
Yeah, well, if this is a game of diplomatic chess, something has shifted pieces on the board. First of all, we heard in real time on Donald Trump's Truth Social that the call was taking place. And then we got Donald Trump's own take on his social media platform soon afterwards. The president said that the call had been very productive and great progress was made. He added that Putin had congratulated him on progress in the Middle East and said that might help with peace in Ukraine.
Yeah, productive, but productive for who, I wonder. But in this post anyway, he announced that Russian and American high-level advisors will meet next week, led by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. No location set for that meeting. But the big announcement is that Trump and Putin themselves do plan to meet again in person in Budapest. No date set for that yet. Trump says it will happen within the next couple of weeks. But interesting that this is taking place in Budapest, because the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, he's a long-time Trump ally. It also, though, works for Putin because he's close with Orban, unlike other EU leaders. Coming to the US again would have been a big concession for Putin. But I just wonder what exactly has changed since Alaska, because there would have to be some real marked movement for this not just to be branded Anchorage Part 2.
And I think what tells us that is that the meeting in Alaska was the first between a US president and a Russian president in 4 years. And here we are 2 months later talking about the sequel. And that call with Putin came as Vladimir Zelensky touched down here in Washington, D.C., ready for his visit to the White House. He's due to meet Donald Trump today, Friday. There was lots of speculation that the US might be about to grant Ukraine access to Tomahawk cruise missiles. The missiles it's currently using have a range of about 600 miles. Tomahawks are precision guided. They're normally launched from a ship or a submarine, and they have a range of 600 to 1,500 miles.
Yeah.
That would give Ukraine the ability to strike deep in occupied territory without going near enemy lines. So it is a potential game changer. That, of course, is not what Vladimir Putin wants. Listen to how Trump broached this with his Russian counterpart.
I did actually say, would you mind if I gave a couple of thousand Tomahawks to your opposition? I did say that to him. I said it just that way. He didn't like the idea.
So the president is saying to Putin, this is my leverage. That would be my next move. What's yours?
Yeah, we've also seen Donald Trump using trade as leverage. At the moment, there is basically no trade between Russia and the US. So it's all part of this negotiation that's going on behind the scenes. It is looking less likely that Donald Trump at the moment will give the Ukrainians access to those Tomahawk missiles, which is a huge worry for the Ukrainians. They're continuing to be pummeled by Russian warheads. So if this war continues, that will be a problem. We're clearly in a week at the moment where the president is in diplomacy mode, fresh from his trip to the Middle East, keen to bring this war to an end too. So we'll see, obviously, what this Zelensky meeting brings, and I guess whether the dial is moved on the Ukraine conflict in time for next year's Nobel Peace Prize deliberations.
Yes, we'll be at the White House, keeping a close eye as always. So stay tuned to Sky News for that.
And from one global conflict to another, Trump waded in again today on events in the Middle East. He posted on Truth Social, if Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. The context to this being that since the ceasefire has taken effect, Hamas has been trying to reassert their control in Gaza.
Yes, while Palestinians wait for the aid to flow in, there have been reports of public executions, arson attacks and gun battles. Hamas battling armed groups it accuses of collaborating with Israel. Further chaos for a region that's already completely subsumed by destruction. Our colleagues in the Middle East have done some very good reporting on this, which we'll link in the show notes if you want to read about it in more depth. Trump's threat to Hamas, of course, does speak to how complicated the situation still is, how fractured it is. The White House wants to focus understandably on how successful President Trump's efforts in the Middle East have been, but there are a huge number of hurdles to overcome, not least what happens to the governance of Gaza in the long term. And Trump was asked about that post in which he talked about going in the Oval Office, and this is what he had to say.
They also said they're going to behave. We're going to find out if they behave. If they behave, good. If they don't behave, we'll take care of it.
I guess the big question here, David, is what does we mean? We will have no choice but to go in and kill them. Is the threat that American troops will be going in Israeli troops? Well, in the Oval, Trump cleared this up. He said it's not going to be us. We all know that any boots on the ground American troop involvement in Gaza would be hugely controversial for Trump's loyal MAGA base. American soldiers in a faraway foreign war is not what they or this president wants for his popularity. But, you know, his post is another reminder about how precarious this ceasefire is and how difficult disarming Hamas will prove to be.
Now, Martha, as well as all that's going on in terms of foreign affairs, there's a lot going on domestically still in the background all the time. Donald Trump's immigration policy continuing apace. He promised the biggest deportation plan of all time, and the raids are still happening every day. You've been taking a closer look at the human impact of that.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously this week a huge amount of focus on Trump abroad. But what about Trump at home? You know, immigration, one of the cornerstones of his presidency. As you say, he came in promising the biggest mass deportation programme in history. And those efforts are ongoing in spite of myriad legal challenges. We're seeing all the time still raids on streets and workplaces, inside courthouses around the country. And more than ever, they're being recorded in real time, you know, on phones and put on social media, shown on the TV. And Some of these arrests are brutal. There was a video, I know you've been in Chicago, there's a video this week of ICE agents tear gassing local people.
Yes, I was in Chicago last week and saw the sheer strength of movement against some of these immigration operations, a huge protest involving 2,000 people. But of course, protests don't really reflect the human impact. Tell us about the story you've been covering, Martha.
I guess, David, one of the questions is what happens after these people are detained? Where do they go? And we've been following the very sad case of a man named Ismael Ayala-Uribe. He came into the US aged 4 from Mexico with his parents. In immigration terms, he'd been granted protected status for people who arrive in childhood, which is known as DACA status. He'd be what we'd refer to in the US as a dreamer. But Ishmael's protected status was removed back in 2016 when he was convicted for a drunk driving offence. So he was in the US technically illegally, although his family say he was working to fix that, to get his papers properly. He'd paid off the drunk driving fines, they say, and he was a working member of the community. He worked in a car wash in a town near LA, same place he'd worked for 15 years, and that's where he was arrested by ICE agents. And a few weeks later, Ismael was dead. We went with the permission of his family to his funeral. The sounds that you can hear there, a mariachi band accompanying the heaving sobs of his family, throwing flowers on his coffin, his primary school-aged nephew, right up to his mother, who's a pensioner. She's called Lucia. She is quite obviously heartbroken, as is Ishmael's brother, Jose.
I feel like just any day he could come home, but I know he's not.
According to his family, Ismael was perfectly well before his detention. His mum had been visiting him regularly in this detention centre in California. She'd been speaking to him, a couple of times a day on the phone. She said that Ismael had been complaining of a fever and a persistent cough in the weeks before he died. She said he was initially treated by medical staff inside the detention centre, but for whatever reason, he was returned to his cell. He was eventually taken to hospital a few days later for a scheduled surgery to remove an abscess on his buttocks. But Ismael died before he was able to have that operation. And shockingly, his family were never even told he was in hospital. His brother said that they learned about his death by a knock on the door from police.
They're the ones that notified us that he had passed. We were not even aware that he was in the hospital or even had a scheduled surgery.
The ICE detention centre didn't get in touch with you to tell you that he'd been taken to the hospital?
Not at all.
Absolutely unthinkable to get that knock at the door when you have no previous idea about a person's condition. What have the authorities said to you about Ishmael's death?
Well, we asked ICE, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, which is leading these deportation efforts over here. We asked them for an interview. They didn't get back to us. They did put out an official statement regarding Ishmael's death. They say comprehensive medical care is provided from the moment individuals arrive and throughout the entirety of their stay. At no time during detention is a detained illegal alien denied emergency care. Of course, the Trump administration would say to this that they're targeting criminals and people in the country illegally in these raids.
So is this just a system struggling to cope with the number of people who are now in detention?
It could well be, and even before these mass deportation efforts under Donald Trump's second term, there were a lot of concerns about the sanitation conditions inside these detention centres, but even more so given the sudden influx of people. I spoke to Sarah Houston, who is a lawyer at the Immigrant Defenders Law Centre. She told me that this is a system which was already stretched, as I was mentioning. Now, she says, though, it is really at breaking point.
This administration's main goal is to harm, to torture individuals and to try to force them out. The great increase we see in human rights abuses, in deaths, is a direct result of the administration's decision to pack these detention centers as much as they can.
Campaigners like Sarah, though, are keen to emphasise that Ismael's death shouldn't be viewed in isolation. Already this year, more than 15 people have died in the custody of immigration services. These raids are continuing unabated, and the people that are being arrested, they have to go somewhere.
Now, Martha, we must mention that John Bolton, Donald Trump's former national security advisor, has just been indicted by the Justice Department. That makes him the third critic of President Donald Trump to face criminal charges in recent weeks. Bolton is being charged with 8 counts of transmission of national defence information and 10 counts of unlawful retention of national defence information. Of course, he denies those charges and says he was permitted to hold this information for use in his memoirs.
Yeah, this case against Bolton has been built for the last 5 years, but given how much of a high-profile critic he is of the president, a lot of people think that this is less about justice and more about retribution. And, I'm sure there'll be more on that to come.
And before we go, a quick word on IVF, as that was Donald Trump's latest big announcement. It meant another press conference where we had to listen to him trying to pronounce the names of drugs.
Go, null, F. So it's go, null, F. Is that a proper pronunciation? Close enough, right? Go, null, F. Pergovirus. Pergovirus. And that's a sound nice name. Pergovirus. Why can't you name them nice, simple names?
Yeah, we heard Donald Trump struggling to say the name of painkillers as well, didn't we, when he made that announcement about autism a few weeks ago. But on a serious point, I wonder whether the fact that he does struggle to pronounce these names and that he's very upfront about, he says, why can't we give them nice, easy to say names? I think it makes him quite relatable because, people do struggle to pronounce the names of certain drugs. But anyway, this was Donald Trump trying to be seen to deliver on one of his campaign promises. On the campaign trail, he called himself the father of IVF. He was promising back then to mandate coverage for IVF, which is in vitro fertilisation, to be paid for by either the insurance companies or the government. Well, that's not quite happened, but the administration is trying to lower costs for families going through IVF here, and it can be incredibly expensive. So I guess anything that can be done to bring down those prices is a good thing.
Yes, Donald Trump announced that one fertility drug manufacturer will lower their price, cutting the cost of drugs for a standard IVF cycle between 42 and 79%, according to the White House. Well, that's a significant difference, with more negotiations ongoing with other drug providers and pharmacies.
Yeah, as I say, this will be welcome news to families struggling with infertility, although I guess not quite the radical overhaul that was promised. David, it's nearly the weekend. What have you got planned?
I've had a crazy busy week, and I'm working the weekend, Martha, because there are protests taking place and someone's got to keep an eye on them.
This man never stops. He's the Donald Trump of broadcasting. Anyway, thank you all for listening. We'll be back on Tuesday on the podcast. You can, though, of course, keep up to date with Zelensky's visit to the White House on the Sky News app and on TV. David will be there.
Yes, another busy day ahead. Don't forget to send us an email at Trump100@sky.uk with any thoughts and questions. We're always glad to hear them. That's it for now. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.